Pope Francis himself, I mean, he's the first Pope to talk about gay people. He's the first person to mention the word gay. And, you know, I can say this, you're not going to be, you're going to be putting this online, by the way?
We were, if you tell us not to.
No, because truly, I know that seems funny, but there's certain things he asked me to keep the details of our meeting private. But I will say this, you know, he met with me for 30 minutes and we talked about LGBT Catholics and reaching out to them, and that I felt very encouraged and consoled and inspired, right? So that was a sign of his, his support of that kind of ministry. So the church, I think, is really moving ahead. I think that the group that feels the most marginalized in the church are LGBT people. They are insulted, excluded, persecuted, singled out, targeted for critique, and can really feel like it's not even their church. Many of them have never felt truly welcomed in the church. Many LGBT people may have never heard the words lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender mentioned in any way other than negative. Right? Imagine that in your own church. Right, still in the United States, there are places that, unfortunately have focused on, firing sometimes LGBT employees because they've entered into marriages or civil unions. And I really think that's sad because, there's no other group that's really focused on like that. I mean, there are a lot of people that are not following church teaching or conveying church teaching through their lives, right, and that are still, working with the church.
So I came across an article that talked about how LGBTQ issues can become pro-life issues. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, it's very simple, and it's a good question. In many countries, in over 70 countries, it's illegal to engage in same-sex relations. I mean, meaning it's against the law. And in 6 countries, according to Human Rights Watch, you could be executed, for engaging in same-sex relations. And so, in a lot of those countries where you can be beaten, arrested, and executed, these are life issues. I mean, these literally are life and death issues. Well, unfortunately, a lot of people use biblical texts to kind of support their homophobia. In Leviticus and in St. Paul. The problem with looking at text in that way is that we don't look at other texts in that way from Leviticus. I mean, look, the Bible, the Old Testament, and even St. Paul speak approvingly about slaves, right, and slavery. I mean, that is accepted in the Old Testament, and St. Paul talks about slaves being obedient to their masters. Now, no one, I hope, in this room or in this church would ever condone that. Why is that? Well, why didn't you just point to the Old Testament passage that talks about slaves, or the passage from St. Paul? Because we understand those things in a different way. And yet when it comes to LGBT matters, suddenly we become fundamentalists. We become literalists. And so what happens is they cherry pick these verses out of Leviticus and out of St. Paul, which meant, by the way, homosexuality at the time meant something that was much different than the way we understand what's going on right now. I'll just say it that way. But the point is this: we have to understand those readings in their historical context. That's not to say you ignore them, but you have to understand them in their historical context. And frankly, any reading that leads us to be hateful or to hate people, right? I mean, I think is something that really needs to be looked at carefully and discerned. There was always this minority position in the Second Vatican Council that is coming up again of resistance. And I think we have to call it that. It is resistance at the Second Vatican Council to some of the reforms, to greater influence of the laity, right? To increase roles of leadership for women, to as something simple again as Mass in the vernacular, to a kind of engagement with the world. to, as John O'Malley said, from monologue to dialogue. So we have to name it. There is resistance, and I think that resistance should be resisted, as charitably as you can. I don't want to sort of talk about all seminaries as if they're the same, but I have talked to seminarians who have told me what that questioner has said that they're worried about. That there is a certain, resistance, even in seminaries, to the Second Vatican Council, and even to even to Pope Francis and what he is trying to do. So I think that the invitation, obviously, is for seminary rectors and for bishops and archbishops to ensure that the people that they're accepting into seminaries, and more importantly, the formation they're getting, is forming them for the Church of today, not the Church of 1956. So much of morality ends up just being sexual issues. That obviously is an important part of human life, but there are a million other issues. I mean, there's the economy, there's the environment. I think that's one of the great contributions of Pope Francis. I think that's part of sort of the history of the Catholic Church in the last 40 or 50 years, unfortunately. I think a lot of it is a reaction to Humanae Vitae. I think it's sort of responding to essentially the sexual revolution and the response to that. But I also think that it's a kind of holdover from that sort of Calvinist way of looking at things in the United States. How can we move past that? By reminding people, as Pope Francis did, I think, that there are other issues. I really think that one of the most important things that he said was in an interview with actually a friend of mine who was just visiting, Antonio Spadaro, which was published in all the Jesuit magazines in 2013, where he said, look, people understand what the Catholic Church's teaching is on abortion and birth control and same-sex marriage. They understand that, right? They know it. And it's not that it's not important, but he said, it's time to look at other issues. He said it's like a teacher, once they've covered that part of the course, they move on, right? And I think that's what Pope Francis is trying to get us to do. On Tuesday, he's going to be releasing his great apostolic exhortation on the Amazon called Carita Amazonia. That's going to talk about that region. It's going to talk about the environment and the economy there and the church there. So, it's more than just sex. And the moral life is more than just the sexual life. I have the support of my Jesuit superiors. I have the support of my Jesuit brothers. I can say, given the meeting, the support of the Pope, right? I have the support of, I would say, most of the people of God who increasingly know LGBT people and their families. And so there's a certain small percentage of people, even a bishop or two that is upset about that or unwilling to listen or unwilling to actually read what I say, then so be it. A lot of the people who sort of say these things, they're just angry. And, a lot of it comes from fear. And among them, there are people, who are also afraid, I think, of their own complicated sexuality. A lot of the people that attack me online, and you can see it, they're ex-gays, right? And that was, invitations from people like Cardinal Supich in Chicago and Archbishop Gregory in Atlanta. I was invited to the World Meeting of Families. The Vatican picked the name of the talk, Showing Respect and Welcome to LGBT Catholics and Their Families. That was the Vatican's idea for that talk. And then the invitation to meet with the Pope. That was a public audience. He put it on his calendar, the public calendar. And then finally, just 2 weeks ago, I was at the Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities, which was a real honor to talk to all the Catholic college and university presidents.